Welcome to the Soul Surgery Podcast. My name is Nikki Clinch, and I am your host. I am a maturation facilitator, teacher and coach, integrative holistic health counselor, breathwork facilitator, and author. I am the founder of the Academy of Maturation Coaching, the Alchemy of Being, where I train as many people as I can to become powerful spaces for human beings to come home to their authentic truth. Maturation is a powerful evolutionary process of dissolving trauma, breaking free of stuck patterns, and growing and healing at the taproot. Growing out of who we thought we were from the stories led by our past conditioning in order to grow and evolve into who we were born to be. In this podcast, I will be sharing many different things with you, opening up the doorways to my coaching sessions where you can witness with your own eyes how trauma contaminates our reality and how we can dissolve it, heal it at the root, and rewrite the story of our lives, reclaiming our power and reminding each one of us that who we are is wholeness. I will be interviewing some of the world's most prominent teachers in spirituality, healing, transformation, and human evolvement, and sharing with you my own teachings and learnings along the way. And above all, sharing with you my heart. The purpose of this podcast is to remind each one of you who you really are, to open up the doorway to a new possibility, to a new paradigm, to healing, health, transformation, and our evolvement as individuals and a species. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. One thing that you can do for me, if you find this podcast useful and if you love it, please do subscribe. And if you feel called to, leave a review, because reviews really matter. They help to spread the word and help to spread this podcast to as many people as we can. And lastly, if you have any big aha moments, any shifts, any insights in any of these episodes, please do share it with me. Share with me which episode it was, where in the episode it happened, and how it has impacted you and your life. So without further ado, let's get going. I hope you enjoy today's episode on the Soul Surgery Podcast. Hello, Michaela. Thank you so much for coming to speak with me on the Soul Surgery Podcast. I've been so excited to speak with you and meet with you today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted. All is well where I'm at in California, so it's a bit smoky, but we're good. No fires in my direct vicinity.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
How have you been coping with this big turbulent time that we're going through right now? Just yourself and your work and where you are. How have you been doing through that?
It's been very interesting because I'm used to being on the road, right? I'm on the road more or less all year. I go between Australia and the UK and Europe and the US. And so my traveling feet are itching mightily. I would love to be out and about, but that's of course not what's happening. So this is the longest I've been home in many, many years. It's been 6 straight months. And so it definitely takes a bit of recalibrating when you're used to being on the road and creative in that way as well. But let's put it this way. I always love the challenge of creatively adapting teaching as it is. So this has been very interesting in adapting things for online and also offering different things and looking at what can be done to support people at home. So it's been all in all creatively good and interesting and challenging. And it is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, that's so perfect and relevant. My opening question to you was, with lockdown and this pandemic and this massive change that felt like it came out of nowhere for everyone, our apparent freedoms got taken away and we got called back into our homes, and all the things that we used to fill our lives got removed, and so we were left, so many of us, or all of us, were left in our homes with this simpler life. And you know, facing each other as couples, facing ourselves. So, when I hear you speak, I hear that listening to be able to adapt that adventurer, that wild spirit in us to the present moment. Like, how do we do that? So, what can you say for the couples, the married couples, the partners, the relationships that have been in lockdown and in this new way of life that have been facing themselves in this way for the first time? Like, how do we keep that? How do we adapt and find that new flow?
That's a good question.
Hmm.
One to which we are still finding the answers, of course, right?
Hmm.
Um, well, there's a few things to consider that are, I think, really important to consider, which is that we are used to, because for many years now, with social media and things of that nature, a lot of people have lived their lives very externally focused.
Yes.
Right, it's all about how it looks and how other people do it, and can we do it like other people, and there's very unrealistic standards to begin with, right? And
Hmm.
there's also an assumption that things are taken care of from the external world.
Hmm.
And when that all falls away, a few things can happen. First, it's hugely disorienting, because
Hmm.
a lot of people are also externally referenced for their standing in the world,
Yes.
right? We define ourselves through our jobs and careers, and our children, how they are connected in school, and all of those kind of things are the the ties that suspend us in our space in a meaningful way, so to speak, right? And
Yes.
when that's no longer the case, when you're no longer identified through going out there slaying the dragon, or going out there taking care of your children, or whatever it is, even a yoga class or something,
Hmm.
it can be quite sobering, and also quite disconcerting. So I think the first and foremost thing to consider is that we have to have patience and compassion and understanding for ourselves in a situation that is not something we've ever experienced. You know?
Yes. Yes.
We all grew up in a time, where we had incredible freedoms, probably more freedoms than any generations before us, societal freedoms, freedoms to choose, freedom who we want to marry or not, having children out of wedlock. All of those things didn't even exist in the 50s or 60s, so I think first things first is understanding that these are not normal times, and one cannot understand or expect that business is being carried forth as normal. I
Yes.
think that's really, really important. So the Instagram perfect home situation is no more when you have to homeschool two children, and you are working from home while your children are there, and your partner is working from home. You're probably not going to have an easy time, and that's okay. So the mark of a good relationship is that when the fault lines appear, because this will make the fault lines appear,
Yes.
you kind of go into cooperation,
Mm.
and you just go, okay, well, here we are. What can we do to make this better?
Hmm.
How can we
Yes.
arrange ourselves so this is bearable? Not,
Yes.
you're not giving me enough sex and I hate you because you're here all day now and breathing down my
Yes.
neck. Well, yeah, it can't be changed.
Yes.
So collaboration and cooperation is the name of the game at the moment, not innovation or or conflict at this
Yes.
particular moment in time.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I really hear that, and I also was really present to worth. I kept hearing worth, when those things that we were attached to get removed, even like you say, just the regular morning schedule to go to yoga or take the kids to school, when all of that is removed, you know, I feel like so many people, including myself, were forced to face ourselves and our worth and our value in ourselves, in our homes. And then if we're in a relationship next to our partners who are probably going through the same. And so, yeah, compassion and collaboration. And what was the second word that you said?
Cooperation and collaboration. You know.
Cooperation and collaboration, yes. I mean, when I was looking into your work, and I'm halfway through your beautiful book, Wild Woman's Way, unlocking your full potential through power, pleasure, and fulfillment. I mean, I was so moved that you chose those three words, power, pleasure, and fulfillment. I was moved because it personally connected with me. You know, I'm a 41-year-old woman. I have two young children. I'm still breastfeeding my second. I run a busy business. And somehow, at the age of 41, somehow this year, something has started to change for me. And I have started to discover a new sense of pleasure and connection and energy within myself. And as I started reading your book, I started to connect the dots, and it has come hand in hand with a connection with my body, a more of a peace with the body, a more of a peace with my own power. And I think what I hear in your book is that it's so connected for women, like this, our worth, our bodies. So can you speak a little bit about, you spoke about social media. Can you speak a little bit about how women today might be able to start finding more peace with the bodies that they have and the energy that they have and where they are versus the picture of how it should be for them?
Yeah.
Mm.
You know, it's not an easy thing, and there is no quick fixes here, in the sense that um, even though we have a lot more freedom, right, and we're much more empowered than, let's say, even our mothers and grandmothers were,
Mm.
there is still a very strong orientation, not only from, it's not just you know, the patriarchy, which is always blamed for everything, right? It's not just that. It's systems within ourselves,
Mhm.
where we value ourselves based on the way we look, and we measure ourselves against other women. That didn't just come from the outside. It's something that has to do with a certain competitiveness, and once again, the lack of collaboration and cooperation between women. We're no longer
Mm.
in a construct where other women are our biggest allies, right? Naturally, because we are no longer raised in groups of women, right? If we're
Yes.
lucky, we have a few female relatives that have an influence on it, but that's not always the case, you know? And
Mm.
so, and also they're not always the best role models. So we have intrinsically lost the collaborative aspect of women helping other women raise their children, you know, attending each other's childbirths, you know, having rites of passage. All of those are no longer natural things. It's coming back a bit, thankfully. And, you know, it's certainly something that is talked about again, but for most people, that's not the reality they grew up with, unless they grew up in a hippie commune or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? So we have a way of measuring our worth by our bodies and our youth and our sexual value,
Mm.
simply because, and this is really important to understand, that is how evolution made us,
Hmm.
right?
Wow.
So yes, and that's something that most people don't want to hear or admit or never think about. When you look at evolution of humankind,
Mhm.
you know, there is a survival of the fittest aspect, in the sense that those who had health and vibrancy and beauty, right, and all of those kind of things, had a better choice of partner. That's
Mm.
just the way it goes, right? And so within that, you have to kind of see that how we choose mates is also based on that, because we're looking at how can raise our children best, right? Who can raise our children best? Who has the most resources so our children survive a long winter? Because that's how it used to be, right? There was no corner stores or things like that. So there was, evolutionarily speaking, a trading for your vibrancy and with that health and genetic well-being against the best resource so the children you produced could live. Because if you chose to have children with the very good looking hunky cave idiot, you know,
he would
village,
definitely have been the one I chose.
yeah, probably couldn't hunt in the winter. Right? He probably couldn't take care of business in the winter. So you might have had a really gorgeous child with the gorgeous cave idiot, but he didn't have the resources. While if you were the third wife of the incredibly decrepit village chief, right, who had vast resources, you were supported by the other wives, you know, by the women in the village. You were part of a construct and a group, and you were taken care of. So this is very simplified, but just to say that these biological knee-jerk reactions, right, are still in us. And so because they're still in us, we still value ourselves as those vibrant, shiny, beautiful, having great DNA, vessels, so to speak, because that also gives us the best chance of having an adequate mate. So there's nothing wrong with that intrinsically. Of course, this then gets supported by fashion magazines, Instagram, and men who like the look of very beautiful, shiny women, right? But as you probably also know, a lot of men who like the look of very beautiful, shiny women and look at their Instagram accounts wouldn't actually want to be with them, because there's more to life than having an incredibly nice, let's call it derriere,
Ass.
Ass, exactly. The nice ass isn't making nice, nice conversation necessarily, not that kind of conversation. So it's a biological knee jerk. It's not everything. And so we have to know and make peace with the biological knee jerk, because that's there, and befriend that aspect of us before we go beyond it. And how we befriend it is that we look at the parts of our body that we do like, and that we look at the parts of our body that give us power and satisfaction and joy. And that could be anything from the fact that you can breastfeed your child, that you gave birth, but also, you might like your hair or your, your toes or something like that. Everyone has something that they can accept. And that's where you start. And then you unpack from there the attributes of your body that really serve you well. And that then you could have some pride in your body and some joy in your body's activity and ability that goes beyond pure visual, because that will go over time. That will go, with our best efforts, that will go, as I can attest, being in my 50s now, so that, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, there's things you can do about it surgically, but even that only goes so far, right? But you have to just deal with it at some point. But what we do have, and this is what you are pointing to, is as we get older, our capacity for living in our body and our capacity for pleasure actually increases. So what we might lose in skin tone, we actually gain an internal capacity for vast pleasure and enjoyment, and also knowing who we are And once
Yes.
you know who you are, you really gain power, and you really gain power, not as in a perverted sense of power, but a personal power and a personal empowerment, because you actually know what you're about. And that's
Yes.
also, mind you, very sexy.
Yes. It's been kind of mind-blowing to me to start to realize that my pleasure is my business. Like, I think about my 20s and I think about my 30s, and I was looking outside of myself for the pleasure and
Yes.
my fulfillment and my power, and and my ability to have more pleasure has come hand in hand with this realization. Oh, my pleasure is my business. My fulfillment is my business. Yeah, and I guess that comes with growing older and finding more at peace with yourself. When you when you were speaking about evolving, that evolutionary growth, I feel like that's happening in every sense. Like, that's happening for the feminine, that's happening in the masculine, that's happening in whatever relationship even is and how it looks like. And like, we're kind of in the middle of this evolutionary process right now. Would you say that that's having a, I mean, is that have what kind of impact is that having on men and women and couples and relationships? It's like, I don't think we even really know where we are right now.
No, we don't know where we are right now. I want to say one more thing about what you just said, which is that true empowerment, of course, comes from being able to supply yourself with pleasure and with well-being and with a sense of self and
Mm,
self-worth, right? Because
mm.
as long as we need it from the outside, it can be taken from us. We're dependent on someone, a man,
Yes.
society, and things like that. So finding it within yourself is definitely a matter of, self-empowerment.
Mm. Can you speak more about that? Let's go down that more and go deeper into that. How can a woman today who's never done any of this work before, how can she start to find pleasure or connect with pleasure in herself first? Where does that even begin?
So when we look at how do we connect with our own pleasure and how do we even find that, the first thing is very basic, right? A lot of people want to go straight to the sex tips and the big vibrator or the whatever, right? And that's our natural way of wanting to get right to the goal, right? But
Yes.
there's a few steps before then that have to be taken into account. Otherwise, it's not sustainable, or it won't have the proper results, so to speak. And so where it starts is our body has to be listened to. And a lot of what happens in our body isn't apparent to us, of course, because we have to live life, and we're also super busy. And so our body has a natural mechanism to numb us to the sensations of the body. Otherwise, no woman ever could wear a bra, right? We have to kind of numb ourselves to what's happening, more or less, because there is just too much information going on. But of course, what that also means is that we're not always clued into the pleasurable sensations in our body. And when we sit and when we think and when we talk and when we type and when we text, our body is essentially just parked, right? And all the energy is needed up here. So first step is to come back into the body, meaning be aware of the messages of the body and actually feel what's going on in there. And we don't always like doing that, because then also the unpleasant stuff shows up.
Can be
Right?
uncomfortable, yes.
Can be uncomfortable. Will be things that we have suppressed that are not wanting to come to the surface. But our ability to have pleasure is directly related to our ability to feel all strong sensations and emotions. You can't have incredible, earth-shattering pleasure and not also feel grief or sadness or anger. That's
Yes.
not really possible,
Yes.
in a sustainable fashion. So sensitizing to the messages of the body, or proper embodiment, you could say, is step number 2. And then step number 1. Step number 2 is relaxation. Actually being able to relax the body so the body can be more open. And that's also super important.
Which goes so against as well, how the modern woman is living most of the time. I certainly have struggled this myself. I see this a lot, is, how fast we move, how busy we are, how hard we push, where, how powerful we are, but actually it's numbing us. Yeah, so
Incredibly so.
relaxation. Say that one
Yeah.
again.
I said incredibly so. It's numbing us incredibly so. Yeah. So yeah, relaxation, and relaxation as in the excess tension in our body that we carry when we do things, like you said, push, right? Push is extra tension that's not needed for the activity. And a lot of our push is emotional push, right? Mental push, must do, must achieve, must get there. There's a kind of a clench that comes with that. And that clench essentially keeps us from feeling deeper. And it also keeps us from the actual energy being freed, the real power and potency, because there's a tightness over it that makes it so we have to kind of apply ourselves in exactly the ways we want to, not taking into account that there's a much bigger wisdom where we could have a lot more available energy, and with that wisdom and with that also resource, if we weren't quite as tight about it and quite as focused about it. So that's one aspect of relaxation. The other one, of course, is relaxation as in actually unwinding and taking time. And so undoing tension patterns is something we can do within the activity. And then proper rest and relaxation and restful activities, joyous, restful activities, hobbies, movement, play, connection. That's the other aspect of that. And then the third step, you have a question?
No, I was just saying that I was just going to say that, I see that relaxation itself can bring up a lot for women, can bring up a lot of deep emotional um, trauma, and it brings up that relationship that we have with trust. And are we going to be supported? Are we going to be taken care of if we slow down, if we let go? Will we be okay? That's what I see. And so I can hear that in itself, just the relaxation part is an invitation for real deep healing.
Absolutely. There is just so much in there. And it's so hard to come by because nothing supports that. And now this brings us back to the pandemic, of course, right? For some people, the pandemic has been a chance to do that, right? For others, not so much, because it's actually taken more of a toll because there's more to do in the home. So it's not, one approach fits all for the pandemic, right? Because some people are having a really, really hard time, and it's not good. I have a friend, she has 3 children that all 3 are in different schools, and all 3 have different school programs, and she has a full-time job, and her husband has a full-time job. So not everybody can attend to that right now, and that's also important to know. But we can all spend 10 minutes somewhere, right? We can all take extra 10 minutes in the shower or in a bath, or sit quietly with a cup of tea for 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be, an hour of meditation or yoga or whatever. It can be done in minute increments as well.
Yes. I was watching an interview that you did last night. I was watching it last night, and my husband was in the other room, and I noticed in the interview you talked about flight, fight, or freeze, fight,
Please.
flight, or freeze. And as I was watching your interview, I could feel how both of us were so shut down at that time. He was in his room, I was in my room, kids were asleep, desperate for time alone. And, we could have easily just gone the rest of the night in that sort of shut down, separate place. And I watched your interview. And so instead of going that way, continuing to go that way, the shutdown, I just went in and I just put my hand on his neck and I just stroked his neck for a moment. And it was amazing to me how such a simple thing created softness in my body. It created softness between us. And it just makes me think it's these little moments, isn't it, in these times of such difficulty, just finding little moments with yourself and with each other. It doesn't have to be like the big
Yeah.
emotional moment.
Yeah. And that's the important piece, right? And this is the thing that sometimes people kind of despair about, because people want these big things, right? But nobody can really actually follow through with those big things. So it's a
Yes.
tiny little bit all the time, that makes a big difference. And my teacher always used to say, the best practice is the practice you actually do. And and that's in the times of aspiration, right, when we're all living these aspirational lifestyles. It's really important to remember that you can make a huge difference in your own body, like you said, in somebody else's body, in 20 seconds, in a minute.
Yes.
And then that exponentially builds. Those little minutes at a time, they don't add up to a straight whatever 10 minutes, they add up to so much more, because it's an exponential engagement with yourself, with the other, through the body. And that's the important thing. Nobody can say that they don't have enough time to do the thing that you did, right? Just go
Yes.
in there, have a moment of connection, and then feel how your own body softens, feel how his body softens. And then that's the beginning of a connection. And then that can feel like, okay, there's hope. And so on and so on, right? So
Yes.
that's doable regardless of your circumstances. And if you can't make a minute or two, then something is seriously wrong, or you are seriously stuck in martyrdom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, ooh. Yes, there was something that you said also in an interview I watched with you, and I wanted to talk about it. You spoke about how there are three, let me get this right. There are three people in a relationship. There's you, there's him, and then there's the dynamic of the relationship. And so
Yeah.
often the dynamic takes over. Is that right? The dynamic of
Yeah.
the relationship is what's living the relationship. And
Yes.
oh,
Yes.
goodness. That,
Yeah.
because that's the story, isn't it? That's the martyrdom, that's the fight, that's the whatever we want to hold on to instead of seeing each other.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
goodness me. Can you
And
speak a
that's really
bit?
important.
Go
I
on.
want to say a thing about that quickly, because that's really important. And it doesn't matter, right? These things, because one of the things that's really happened recently, particularly, I would say in the last 10 years, is everything is through the lens of gender, and through the lens of polarity. And there's so much more to human dynamics, and so it's really, really important to understand that in any relationship, romantic or otherwise, same sex or opposite sex, doesn't matter, right? There's your being, the other being, and then there is an entity that is formed by the relationship dynamic. And the relationship dynamic is influenced by a couple of factors. And a big factor is the imprints from your upbringing, right? How you were taught relationship. Then another factor is your previous relationship imprints, right? So your plus and minuses of previous relationships. And then, and this is very important, your trauma patterns. right? And so often the entity of the relationship is the part of us that lives out previous injury and seeks out behaviors that we know from previous injury. And so if you have a relationship with anyone longer than a couple of years, you have that entity in the room, so to speak. Right? And so that's super, super important to know, because that particular dynamic can make you feel a little bit like, why am I doing this again? How did we end up here again? You know, this all started really nicely, and now look where we are, right? That's the dynamic that is self-perpetuating at a certain moment in time. And knowing that is very freeing in itself, because then you know you're not just crazy, or the other person isn't just plain evil. It's a matter of unpicking that relationship dynamic.
Yes, and when you start to see that, I would imagine a lot of couples are starting to see that, if not have been seeing that in lockdown. There's there's no distractions, we don't get a lot of space, and suddenly the entity, the patterns are just exaggerated by a million. So when you first see that and you see, wow, how did I end up here? What would you say is the next step?
Well, I think, you know, there's always a few things to consider, one of which is that there is no real replacement for a good therapist. And you know, that's not something that's commonly acknowledged, because people somehow think that you have to be pretty broken or things have to be pretty messed up to go and do therapy. But as a matter of fact, in an ideal world, you do the education on what drives you before you are in trouble. That's, of course, not how it usually works out. In most people, very rarely do I get clients who go, or even people in workshops who go, well, we're here to educate ourselves before things go wrong. There is people like that, but very few, right? So I think it's important that you have a roadmap of what drives you. So when you end up in some dead end street, you know how you got there. That I think is very, very important. So, and I don't think there's any good substitute for that, because it's good to have a guide who knows the basic lay of the land, if we want to stick with the map analogy. But parallel to that, or in absence of that, because also really good people are not that many, and they're quite hard to find often. And sometimes people don't have the, you know, the means to do that either. But in the absence of that, what you can do is that when you realize that you end up in the same place again and again, that when you end up in that place, one or two people have the wherewithal to disengage. And that takes a certain kind of fortitude and also maturity, because, you know, we want to be right and we want to kind of perpetuate that pattern. But you can pretty much in a sane moment go, well, we always end up here. So when that happens, you have to just be able to say, okay, let's step away. Let us just step away. This is the moment we always get to. Nothing ever good comes from this moment. And then over time, you get to be able to disengage from that pattern earlier and earlier, till at some point you see it coming. And that's the moment you've, so to speak, won, because when you can see it coming, you can actively disengage before the worst happens. And that takes a bit of time and discipline, but it can be done. I've seen it being done. I've done it for myself. Like I said, it takes something. It doesn't always work, but it can be done. And that you can do by yourself, because every sentient human, right, can go, oh, we've been down that road before. That's very doable.
And in those moments, what practice could you invite to the listeners that they could bring to their partner, or to bring to the relationship, that could create a connection, or create a different energy, or create some form of peace or love between them? when the triggers pass or the triggers come, and just to bring some wholeness there.
Well, like you were saying earlier, you were saying pleasure is your business, right? Disconnection from a pattern is also your business, meaning you can do it for the other person. You can only do it for yourself, and they can do it for you. So one of the most effective things is to get back into the body, right? And you can accomplish that by just moving your body. It doesn't have to be, even if you just do a bit of, like wiggling and shaking and moving the body, so then your energy goes back down and you are capable again of being with the other person. And
because you're
ideally,
being with yourself.
being with yourself, you can feel yourself, right? So that's the first thing. The other thing is you can agree up front, because typically we have sane moments with each other, right? Where you can talk about that. You can agree upfront on a phrase or a word or a sentence that you say. And that could be something like, what can I do for you right now? Or what do you need? Or it's always better to extend to the other person than go, I need, right? Because the moment you go into I, they go into I, and then you have these things. When you go, what do you need right now? What can we do, right? Things like that. Then there's a chance that there's enough of a pause, if the other person then goes, well, go away, you ever, yeah, well, then you have to just step away. But typically the reaching out, right, reaching out either verbally or even physically reaching out, if that's appropriate, and placing a hand on a knee or a thigh, or holding a person's hand, right? Now I'm saying this, of course, within the consent of a adult consenting relationship, where you're not so far gone that a touch is perceived as an attack or something like that, then better not. But in normal healthy relationships, when there's a real tension point, it's not a bad idea to just reach over and make the connection, because that also humanizes you to your partner, and your partner humanizes to you. And you're capable of actually going, oh, this is my partner, right?
Yes. Do you feel that becomes easier? It's kind of hand in hand to what we were speaking about before, when we as women can start to connect to our own self-pleasure, our own connection to how we feel being in our body, that in correlation to our ability to be with ourselves in that way, we, in those moments, we're more likely to choose to put the hand on the knee, and create some kind of connection rather than go back into the martyr and the fight. They both feel like choosing connection rather
Yes.
than separation.
Yes, I think that's definitely true. And once again, as I was saying earlier with the pleasure, when you are able to supply yourself and you don't look at your partner as the purveyor of all good things, right? Which is a very disempowered stance. Then you can also be a bit more generous, because you come from a place of abundance and not a place of lack. And so in general, I think for us as women, this comes also back to the body, and not only pleasure, but also sensual aliveness. The more we can feel that we are supplied with the things we want for ourselves, right? Like you have, beautiful colors on, you sit in a chair that's clearly comfortable, right? I have a certain kind of a backdrop that gives me great joy every time I sit in front of Zoom, right? So that's giving to yourself, and then that creates a feeling of abundance where you're not you're not constantly going mine, I need. You can extend. And I've said this many times before, I sound like a broken record, but it's so important. Generosity towards your partner and towards yourself is is the lubricant for all things, so to speak, right? It makes a
Yeah.
relationship work better. It makes you feel better about yourself as well, because generous giving uh, is the antidote to feeling lack and feeling deprived. It's not
Yes.
getting, because the getting tries to fill a hole that's unfillable, so to speak. The giving takes the attention away from that lack, and that in an odd way actually does fill the hole, right? That's very,
Yes.
very workable. And so the abundance and the knowing yourself and knowing your own body also allows us to be a lot more generous to our partner and our friends and children, everyone.
Yes. Well, that comes, I have a few questions from listeners who wanted to me to ask you some questions because I think it really is aligned with what you just said. One woman says, "How can I get my desire back? It's gone, it's completely gone. I have no sexual desire at all, and I haven't had sex with my partner in 2 years. How do I begin? How do I get it back?" So that's
Mhm.
one question from a listener. So what would you say to her?
Well, there's no pat answers for that because we don't know the circumstances, right? So the circumstances can range from anywhere, let's say, just busy life and heavy circumstances, right? And lots of stress, all the way to a break in trust, um, a set of circumstances in a living situation that doesn't make that appropriate. So there's no pat answers of, well, just connect back to your feminine and all will be fine. It's never that simple, right? And anybody who tells you it's that simple is lying, because you have to look at what is it that made that happen. So that's why there's no pat answer, but there is pointers. And so one of the most important pointers within oneself is the having sensual engagement before expecting that there is sexual aliveness or sexual desire.
Yes, yes.
And that's super, super important. And sensual engagement can be done regardless of the circumstances, because it's nothing else but engaging the senses. So you can touch your own hands, right? You can play with touch by massaging your own hands. You can smell something that smells really good. You can taste something that's really pleasant. You can look at something that you find very beautiful. You can listen to things that you find enlivening or soothing, or that fill you with a sense of enjoyment, right? So accessing your own inner richness through your five senses is very doable. When that happens, it wakes up the same faculties that get woken up in desire. Right? So that's one thing to be said. The other thing is, as I was saying earlier, sensitizing to the messages of the body. Because if you don't actually feel pleasure in your body, it's hard to have desire. And that's also very, very important. So there's there's many, many things that you can do. I created an entire 6-month course that's called Awakening the Pleasure Body, that deals with how do you get to sexual desire. And we don't actually look at sexual things till month 5, because there's so much waking up, and there's so much freeing of creativity, freeing of life force, vitality, that play into having desire. And then on the partner end, right, it's easy to lose desire for someone with whom we have too much commonality, right? Whereas we spend too much time together with too much of, we're the same. Sameness, right, doesn't make for excitement, doesn't make for, in my traditions, they call that erotic friction, right? There isn't a lot of hotness. And so that's a whole other story, but you start with yourself and you find what would fan the flames of the desire, so to speak.
I love that erotic friction. I love that. That's so beautiful because I it's almost like we get taught the opposite, that when there's any friction, we have to find ways to immediately become the same. But then we all become the same, and it kills that erotic friction. That's so beautiful. Thank
Yes.
you for sharing that. Oh, Michaela, it's absolutely wonderful to speak with you. I feel like I could literally, we could do this for 2, 3 hours. This is such a deep and alive and beautiful process. And what I hear more you say repeatedly, and I think it's so true, is that there actually is no quick fix. This is a deep, everyday integrative process and relationship, right? With ourselves.
It is, and at the same time, the quick fix is come back to the body, right?
Mhm.
When we trust in the wisdom of our body, a lot of the things that we can't figure out cognitively actually can happen all by themselves.
Yes.
So, that's not a quick fix as in do this and this will happen, but I can say with great confidence, connect to your body, and your body will unfold things for you that you couldn't even dream of or think of,
Yes.
because there is such wisdom in the body that goes beyond our brain development and our intelligence, right? There is a much, much deeper wisdom there. And so
Yes.
the hacks, the life hacks happen by coming back into the body, moving the hips, taking a bit of time to engage with our senses, and all of those kind of things. And then that creates an upwelling of the right kind of connection and the right kind of support.
Yes, and so I want to send all the listeners to your non-linear movement method, which is all about that, waking up the body and somatic release, and just I love, the untamed wildness in us. I want to send everyone there, and your book, Wild Woman's Way, such a beautiful book. I'm halfway through, as I said, and I'm loving it so much. So thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing us everything that you have today. I know that you have to go to your next session, but I just really appreciate spending this time with you and for all the work that you do. And so thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.